Hello, my name is Rachel Adams. I'm a doula, a yoga instructor, and a realtor, and I love to help families transition. So this is my home birth podcast, Serene Support Home Birth Podcast. And now I'm going to throw it over to Danni so she can introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Danni. I am a mom. I'm also a yoga instructor. I'm a birth worker too. So I'm currently a student midwife, and home birth has a really huge piece of my heart. And it's a very passionate topic for me, definitely.
Great. So let's just start. You said you had 4 kids. So let's just start from the beginning. And how was your pregnancy like, your very first pregnancy?
So I actually was a teen mom, and I had my first birth at home, attended by a midwife. But my mom was always extraordinarily open with her own choices in her births. I have one sister, and she chose to give birth to both of us unmedicated. And while it was in a hospital, she voiced several times that she was grateful for the attending nurses within her care. There were no midwives available at that time. And home birth was actually not legal within the state that we were living in at the time that I was born. But she always voiced very clearly that she enjoyed birthing and pregnancy and breastfeeding and all those things. And so I really feel like that played a really big role in my choice. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I was 16. And I knew immediately that I was not going to give birth in the hospital. And so I started calling around. I happened to have a nurse practitioner that I saw for like gynecological work. And I asked her receptionist, I said, hey, I'm pregnant, but I really want to have a home birth. Can you guys, I just assumed that, that these communities would be connected, that these professionals would be connected. Why would they not be, in my mind at the time? And the receptionist was actually extraordinarily rude. And she told me, home birth is not legal and there's a huge risk to it. And I kind of just let it all roll off my back. I was like, that's really weird. And I called somewhere else, and I can't remember where. And I just kind of called down a line, and it was like this weird phone tree. And I landed on someone who happened to have had a home birth. And they said, I know exactly where to send you. And they sent me to this midwife. And as soon as I met her, we set up a meeting. She was just phenomenal. And she still actually influences my life to this day. 13 years later, like, she just absolutely influences my life.
Great. So an instant click.
Yeah, absolutely. And she put up with all of my million questions, and she supported me 100%. She never judged me for being, basically a baby, having a baby. And she supported me and educated me in all of my questions and my endeavors. And she was really wonderful. And I had the best pregnancy. I mean, I still had so many like sicknesses. Like, I was still sick in my first trimester, and I suffer from migraine headaches that are hormone induced. So I definitely like had all those things, but I never stopped. Like, I just continued about my life, and I loved my body more than I had ever before. And that was phenomenal. Like, I didn't realize that there was a lot of people who, approached me when they knew that I was pregnant. Well, your body's going to change, and oh my gosh, and you're never going to get your body back, and don't breastfeed. And there's just so much fear mongering. And I think that those particular people and their voicing their opinions just like drove me more to choose to home birth, to choose to breastfeed. It was almost like out of spite, like I'm going to prove you wrong. So the pregnancy was really beautiful, and it was really wonderful. And I went into labor early in the morning, like most women do, and called my midwife. And I was like, hey, I think it's time. And she just was like delighted and came over, and my sister was living at the time. My now husband was living with us, and we were living with my mother. And my sister happened to just be moving back from New York, and she was there as well. And
that's very special.
It was a really huge thing. Everybody was really excited. And my midwife came in, and she like assessed the room, and she like knew immediately. She was like, okay, let's go into your room, Danni. And like went in there. And of course, like my husband followed and like sat down on the bed. And she was like, do you feel like you're in labor? Like her whole like demeanor was just like, the whole house was like, ah! And her whole demeanor was like, okay, and we're going to bring it down now.
She was the calm in the storm.
Yes, which I fully appreciate, because I ended up actually moving extraordinarily fast, especially considering that I was a primate and I had not had any children before that. And she, was instructing me through a couple things because I was obviously like a new mother and had not ever given birth before, and what to do, what might feel better. She started guiding me through things, and before I knew it, I was moving so quickly through labor that it was overwhelming. It was like, especially
Very
for,
intense.
yeah, especially for a first time mom, I was like, this was not what I was anticipating. I was expecting 24 hours of like a slow ramp up. And I was like 3 hours in and, practically to transition and was practically crawling out of my skin, And she made the really beautiful suggestion for me to get into the tub. And I did. And things really slowed down. And the gravity and the weight, and I think my mental mindset of being scared, truthfully being scared, it helped to ease all of those things. And so I kind of sat in this same place for like a good solid hour. And she offered to check me and I accepted. And she said, you haven't moved, like I think that at the time I was like 6 centimeters. And she checked me when she got to the house and I was 6 centimeters. All of that entirely consensual. Now that I'm a student midwife, I understand how accurate that consent was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she walked me through it and she said, okay, you're not moving. And I said, okay. She said, you got a mental block. And I said, I'm scared. And she said, okay, well, how about, we do some things. And that was when my sister stepped in. And I got into the shower because I needed to remove like the weightlessness so that my uterus could contract down and my baby could come down. I was using a little bit too much of the weightlessness to hold the baby up and not actually open the cervix by coming down. And so I hopped in the shower and transition hit. And I know that you're probably familiar with what transition feels like. For those who are not, it's very intense. For me, it was a completely out of body experience. And I just cried and cried and cried and cried. And my most specific memory, and I don't have 2 very specific memories of transition. And the first one is that I was sitting on the floor of my mother's shower in her bathroom. And it was a big glass door that separated it. And I was squatting on the floor with my knees up against the glass door and my head pressed up against the glass door and on my forehead. And I was just bawling my eyeballs out, just sobbing. I just needed to release everything. And my sister was on the opposite side of the glass door in the bathroom. And she had her hand on where I had braced my hand up against the door, and her hand was braced up against that. And she was just walking me through it. I couldn't tell you what she said now. I know it mattered in that moment, but I don't know what she said now. And it was just this really beautiful moment of connection. And my sister is my best friend. And that was one of the biggest things that I remember in transition was that particular anchor in labor was what I needed. And it was the connection of womanhood and sisterhood. Even though she didn't have a baby and she had never gone through labor, she could feel it and she knew that she was needed. And she immediately was just pulled there and just connected through me. And so that was really beautiful. And I moved around through transition and went through the whole labor land and everything. And I moved to the bed, and I have my second specific memory before having my son. And it was that I remember moving what felt like at the time, and this is going to show my level of woo, but I remember feeling like I was just moving through realms and portals and transitions. I wasn't even in this universe anymore, but I knew that this was my calling and that I had to bring this child earthside. And that was what I had to do. And when I came back in, I remember sitting up and looking up at my midwife and being like, I feel like I have to push.
That's
no
incredible.
in my brain. What was that? I'm sorry.
I said that's incredible that you had that out of body experience, and those are all the hormones, and you had that euphoria.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. It was wild, And of course, my midwife was like, well, I can check you. We can just try pushing, how do you feel about it? And I was like, no, I have to be sure. Check me. And of course, that was at 10 centimeters. And I said, okay, I'm getting in the pool again. And I waddled my butt into the pool and I pushed for roughly 45 minutes. And right around the time that my son was crowning, my midwife encouraged me. She said, hey, you should look down, you should touch your baby, and take your hand down there and see what it feels like. Your baby's right there, because I was getting tired. And I did, and I remember feeling the soft like hair of his head and being like, oh my God, like this is real, like I'm actually having a baby.
You're doing it. That's
All of this,
empowering.
like all the labor and the transition and the intenseness of pain and all of those things. And it was like feeling my baby's head, like actually crowning. That was like, whoa, that's a baby. And he promptly was born. He was actually born half in call. And he was born in the water, and my husband caught him and he pulled him up to my chest. And it was just this like, oh, life-changing moment. I know that it's not always intense like that for a lot of people, which is completely understandable because there's a lot of adrenaline rolling through it. But in my first birth, pulling my son up on my chest, that was a whole like life shifting, altering type of movement. And just looking into his little face was beautiful. So, and I like was like, oh my God, I did it.
Wow.
Oh my God. There was
great.
There's so much doubt, and everyone like in my ear and in my corner, and like the only two people in my whole family that supported me were my mother and my sister, and they were like, of course you can do it. But everyone from my husband's parents to my own father to grandparents and extended family and chosen family, they were like, are you sure, like you're really gonna do it, really? So
you showed them,
right?
Mm-hmm.
I did. So I pulled him up in my chest. I was like, oh my gosh. One, that's a real baby. Whoa. And then two, like, oh man, I freaking did it. And that was really cool. It was really wonderful. And that was probably like the most life-changing moment. I think I said that, but I just have to like really do that again. My midwife was wonderful. She walked me through. I had mastitis, but like I went on to breastfeed. I went back to school. I graduated. I did school to make up for the school that I lost when I was pregnant, and immediately postpartum. So I did about roughly like 80 hours.
Wow. Congratulations. Yeah. You are strong in multiple aspects.
And that my son did not take a bottle the entire time. And so I was breastfeeding like between classes. But it was really beautiful, because by the time I got there, I just didn't care. I knew that I had to breastfeed, and I knew that I was going to do it, and I knew I was going to graduate, and I knew I was going to go to college. And so I was attending college and finishing high school and getting my degree, like, and being a mom, like all at the same time. And it was just wild. It was just wild. The whole time was like a blur. But it was another one of those moments of like, wow, I did it. Like I graduated and I had my baby, and like it was really amazing. And I breastfed. That was like one of the biggest things that I was like, I'm making it to a year. And we went well past, we went almost to 2. And that was just like the coolest thing ever. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah, they were just so life-changing.
So your postpartum was intense, but also positive?
Yeah, it was. The postpartum period, I speak to now the women that I attend in their births and the families there. And I tell them, I'm like, I didn't listen to my midwife. I didn't listen to her. So let me tell you, rest, let people feed you, let people come and clean the house for you, let somebody else deal with the children if they have other children, like let everyone else do everything else, because you have to rest. And I remember my midwife specifically talking about, you need to make sure that you're resting for 40 days. She was a very traditional midwife. I mean, she had very clear ideas of what postpartum should look like. And so when I didn't, I think that she was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. But now I tell a lot of people, I'm like, hey, it's really important here,
Yes. I say 5 days in the bed, 5 days around the bed, 5 days, just taking it real easy. Those first 2 weeks are important.
They are.
Awesome.
So my second child was born 3 years later, and my husband had joined the military, and we moved out to where we are now in Virginia. And we had planned to have another baby, but he kind of came at us a little bit unexpected and a little bit more before we were planning to. but welcome nonetheless, because we both really enjoyed being parents. And when we found out we were pregnant, about 2 months in, my husband found out that he would deploy and that he would not be around during the time that he would be born. So I made the hard decision to go ahead and make sure that I was traveling home. That way I would have the support of my mother and his family as well. And then my sister was living in the same town at the time as well. So I thought this would be a good time. I'll just go ahead and go home and rely on family since I won't have a husband. And originally we were planning on doing a home birth, but we actually risked out for reasons that I think that might have been able to, now looking back with a little bit more education, had been manageable with co-care. But we ended up risking out for a weird antibody count of cal antibodies. And there is a risk to it, but I had bypass surgery, open heart surgery when I was 13. And I believe that the antibodies came from the blood transfusion that I received during that time. But because they couldn't prove that, and because the midwives that were seeing were not comfortable with that, I ended up risking out and already seeing a perinatologist during the pregnancy. So when I transferred care from here in Virginia to back to our hometown, New Mexico, I just stayed with a midwife that I trusted who would be on call for me and attend for me at the hospital. And she was really wonderful. And I had a really beautiful pregnancy with my second son. But it was slightly more stressful because I wasn't in my home.
Yes.
And I didn't have a husband, and I was living with my mother. And so I was kind of not confined, like my mother and I have a really wonderful relationship and she opened our home beautifully. But that feeling of this space is mine, is like kind of confined to like one room. And so that was a little bit difficult to kind of wrap my head around. And when I went into labor, I text my mother because she was in the next room and I didn't want her to wake up her wife. And there we had like 3 dogs at the time. And I was like, you know what, we're just going to keep it nice and calm. And at the time, the midwife told me that because it was flu and cold and flu season, I couldn't bring my son with me, which was really devastating. So my oldest son was basically just like a little like partner in crime for me at that point. We did.
And I know that moms can relate to that now with all the COVID stuff going around. So that's hard.
Yes, it was so hard. And while I knew that he was absolutely cared for, provided for, and trusted care, I really wanted him to experience this birth. I wanted him to know what birth was. I wanted him to be connected to his brother in a way that was not just like, there's a belly, there's a baby. I felt like it was important, and I couldn't provide that for him. So I was feeling really heartbroken during that. And I, of course, did what I'm sure a million other military spouses have done before. I hopped on my computer and I sent an email to my husband and I said, hey, I'm in labor. And we had an agreed upon with the ombudsman that said, like when I go into labor, I'd text her and she would let command know. And then maybe they'd have a satellite phone that they could connect through that. It just so happened that we were lucky enough that my husband had Wi-Fi at that time. And so he got the email and was aware and was hunting down his commanding officers so that he could figure out how to contact me. But in the short time from when I emailed him to when he was able to actually get a phone, my son had already been born. Like his labor was just phenomenal. It was phenomenal, but it was so fast that I didn't even know what happened. We were trying to walk out the door and I was trying to make sure that everything was okay and set up for my oldest son. And I had a contraction that was just so different. That was just one of those contractions that you just know, like, oh wow, okay, like we really need to move right now. Or, in home birth stance, like, hey, have you called the midwife?
Yeah.
And I sat down because the contraction actually brought me to my knees, and my water ruptured. And I had never experienced that before because my first son was born nearly in call. And it was like this, like, what the heck just happened moment. And I looked at my mom and her wife and I was like, okay, my water broke. And they were like, we have to go. And so my mom loaded me up and I was like drenching sweat, and it was a February night and it was cold outside and I was just like pouring sweat and the windows were down. And I kept telling my mom, like, oh my God, like stop moving. She's like, I have to move the car to get us to the hospital, you know?
So that was a stark difference between the home birth and the car ride.
Oh God, it's horrible. Oh, it's horrible. Moving in labor is terrible. So I called my midwife and I'm on the phone with her, and she said I couldn't communicate with her. She literally couldn't understand anything that I was saying. So she just assumed that I was in labor, and she just told me, okay, I'm on my way to the hospital, you know? And where my mom at this point, I'm attempting to call Red Cross to contact my husband because he had not responded to the email. Little did I know that he saw the email, didn't say anything, and then immediately went to a commanding officer. But I was trying to contact him through Red Cross, and it was three things going on simultaneously. I'm on the phone contracting loudly with Red Cross. And my mom is speeding to the hospital because she can see how close I am to delivering. And we're in a hospital zone because we're that close now. And so she's speeding, going like 45 miles an hour in like a 15-mile-per-hour zone. And a cop sees us and starts doing lights. And I look at my mom and I'm like, if you stop this car right now, I'm giving birth in this seat. So she just puts her flashers on and just goes faster.
Oh my goodness. That's intense.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't honestly remember. I remember well enough that I rattled off my husband's social security number, and the person was like, okay, terrified on the other line. I'm pretty sure it was a man on the other line. And they were just terrified. And they said, okay, we're going to contact your husband. Thank you so much. Hang up. And I have a contraction and I'm pushing. And we're pulling into the parking lot of the hospital, and there's sirens and lights behind us. And my mom just pulls directly up to the emergency room door because it's the closest door. And I don't even wait for the car to stop moving fully. I just open up the door, and the police officer comes around because at this point, I think he's assuming it's an actual emergency. And I just look at him and I'm like, I'm going to give birth right here if you don't get out of my way.
He's like, oh, okay.
And he's like, okay, all right, let's get you a wheelchair, huh? And a security officer saw that, and I think heard that interaction. I couldn't know for sure. And comes running out with a wheelchair, and someone tried to stop that security officer at triage, and he was like, nope, I'm going to labor and delivery. Well, come to find out, he told me later that when I was checking out, he was like, I actually had to deliver a baby in the elevator, and I don't ever want to do that again. So I was just rushing you where you needed to go.
He knew better.
Yeah, they took me as quickly as possible up to labor and delivery. And as soon as I hit the triage area of labor and delivery, or the nurses station, whatever that's called, the nurses came. They knew I was coming. My midwife had already been there, and she met me there. She said, hey, and I didn't even tell her anything. I just made the like grunting noise that you make during pushing. And she was like, okay. And I just looked at her and I was like, he's crowning. And she was like, we're going to check you. It's totally okay. And I was like, nope, take these pants off. He's crowning. And I'm like in the middle of like the nursing station. No one knows where I'm at. No one knows my name. They're just like, this lady's having a baby. Let's get her a room, huh? And by the time they pushed me into the room, I was already like taking off like my sweatpants, and was like, this can't be here anymore. Like, give me, like, I don't care what you have to do, but like, get these off. I'll catch my own baby. And I had a reprieve in between contractions. And my midwife looked at me and she was like, you don't want to have your baby in a wheelchair. That's not going to happen. Don't do it. Come on, hop up on the bed. Like, you can squat on the bed, hands and knees, baby girl. You can stand on your head and kick at the moon while you push your baby. Don't have a baby in the wheelchair. Come on. So I did. I waddled my happy little butt onto the bed, and my son was born about 2 seconds later.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah. So I think his total labor and delivery was roughly about 3 hours and 15 minutes. And the nurses were phenomenal. They were so kind and so respectful. But they told me, they were like, wow, thank you so much, like, for being here and letting us experience that, because we actually haven't seen a baby be born in any position other than on a woman's back. And when I got up on the bed, he was already crowning, so I didn't have any room to like put pressure down like on my bottom, so I just sat and I got on hands and knees. And then I caught him and like moved him through my or was assisted to catch him, and then moved him up to my chest and sat back. And they said, we've never seen anyone do that before. And I was like, really? But now thinking back, I'm like, wow, that's really like, really? It's not like, that's not right.
That's
So
crazy. And they didn't have any time to tell you otherwise. So
no, they didn't. I honestly I probably would have given him a middle finger if they had asked me. So.
Good on you. You got to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I was like, no, I just thought it was really funny that the nurse who greeted me, I was like, he's crowning. Mm-hmm. And she was like, okay, we'll check you. It's totally fine. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Take these off. He's coming out. Like, and I think that caught her like attention, because she actually like happened to like look at my vulva and like see a baby crowning, you know, like it's very obvious. And that caught her attention enough to be like, okay, like maybe I should. Where's Donna the midwife? Can we get her here, please? So, my second born is.
So was there a doctor present when you gave birth?
No, my midwife did make it in. She made it
Great.
in there, and she was like, hey, you know, and she had attending rights within there. So she did like, you know, do the whole, she helped me catch him. But I don't think that anyone actually suspected that I was moving as quickly as I was claiming that I was moving. So, and that child's postpartum period is another, like, I should have rested more. I wish I would have been more in tune to what I was actually able to claim in that moment. But I didn't, because I was just kind of, I don't know. I guess, you know, like, I feel like it probably was like a lot of indoctrination that we hear, you know, you get 6 weeks, take your 6
Yeah, and then
weeks.
you got to bounce back. And
Bounce back,
it's
girl.
not that
like,
easy, though. So how was your initial bonding period time right after for the hospital birth?
It was fine. You know, I didn't have the same response that I had with my first child. And I really think that that had a lot to do with the environment that I was in, because as soon as my son was born, there was like people rushing in and people rushing out. And, you know, like there was this huge, like chaotic moment. Whereas when my first was born, there was a lot of excitement in the room, but it was enough of the energy that I knew these people, I knew their energy, and I knew that it was excitement for like being able to watch like the birth of like the first grandchild in that house, and the like accomplishment of like what I had accomplished, and like pride, and then of course like just the excitement of watching life, you know. Whereas like in the hospital, the versus of that was that it was just so it's like it was very business like, you know,
very clinical.
Yeah,
like let's get all the tests done. Okay, yeah. Checking baby out. Yeah.
And while everyone was of course respectful, and I didn't encounter like rude faces or people, it still was a very clinical experience versus my home births, you know. And I don't think I slept well. I actually threatened to check myself out AMA if they didn't get a pediatrician to check my baby so that I could leave without an AMA. And I was like, you don't understand, like, I'm not comfortable. I want to go home. Like, I want to go home. Please take me home.
So you left early?
Yeah, I left, I think in the hospital I delivered in, they had a recommendation of everyone staying for 36 hours after birth. And I left at about 20. So with, you know, with like discharge papers, but it was literally me looking at my midwife, and I was like, I'm ready. And she was like, I don't think you should leave that. You don't want to stay and rest. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm not resting. I want to go home. Like, please take me home.
Yeah, you rest better at home where you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So that was kind of a whirlwind. And then, you know, like introducing my newborn to my husband, like via FaceTime was like, or Skype, I think at the time, was of course like a little bit disheartening, and, you know, makes you feel kind of lonely. And the idea of changing from one child to two children was really hard. It was really, really hard. And then doing so like without a partner, and then doing so like outside of my home. I was 8 weeks postpartum when I flew back, and my husband got home within the next 4 weeks. Um,
You definitely felt that difference of feeling euphoric through transition to, oh, there's a cop behind me, like I gotta pull my pants off, like in the nurse's station. Yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely different.
yeah. It was a very different type of spiel. But that child went on to, like, we successfully breastfed, like regardless of like kind of like for the first time ever really working through like some postpartum anxiety and like doing baby blues, experiencing baby blues, because I didn't experience either one of those after my firstborn. And then kind of like navigating those things. That was interesting. That was very, very interesting. But that child, we successfully breastfed, and he breastfed until he was 5. We are full blown like full term nursing family. I didn't think that would be us. Like every other person I think who has ever said that, like who's ever said like, yeah, my kid nursed way past toddlerhood. Like I just like everybody else. I didn't think that would happen, but
every child is different too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And his younger sister, between we ended up tandem nursing, so that was a definite.
Oh, that's very neat. Yeah. So that was a bonding experience for them as well.
Yeah. Sometimes they talk about, I'm not sure if they remember it or if they know, like they're aware of it because I've spoken of it, but sometimes they talk about it, and I was on this side and you were on that side and we used to kick each other eyeballs. And
wow, that's a very neat experience for them to have. Mm-hmm. Great.
So between my second born being born and my third living child being born, we had a second trimester miscarriage. The growth that I had between my second child and my third child was exponential. Like so much happened. We got pregnant. I actually had not cycled yet because my child was still nursing. And I tend to not cycle until my kids are around like 18 months old. And we had reached that point and gone past it. And I was feeling really horrible. And I thought, oh, I might be pregnant. Like that is a very valid thought here. And there was a very small window of time in which we could have conceived because my husband was in and out of training at the time, getting ready to deploy. And so I kind of had this momentary fear of like, oh man, like I'm going to have another deployment baby. And then also like, oh my God, like I might be pregnant right now. And I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I was like, okay, it's okay. Like, it's okay. It's totally fine. But I ended up being pregnant, and it took a little while for it to sink in and to like absorb this like idea of being a mother again and having to deliver while my husband was deployed again. And for my husband, at the time, like the reality of like not being able to attend a birth again. And that was kind of odd, but we were excited nonetheless. And we traveled home for Christmas to be with family. And the night that we arrived, everyone came over to my in-laws' house to say hello to us and to see the kids, to see our 2 sons. And we were like surprised we're pregnant, like we're so excited, and everybody was so excited for us. And right around the time everyone left, I went to the bathroom and I wiped, and I was like, that's blood. Oh no. Like that does not feel good. And I had kind of been cramping all day, but I was also super dehydrated. And I was feeling a little bit, at this point I had done work in birth work, like towards training towards a doula. And I had actually had the opportunity to work under the midwife that was the attending midwife with my first as a student. And so I was aware that cramping was not abnormal, and that blood really didn't necessarily mean, especially because I had already entered, I was in the 12th week at that point. It just entered my second trimester. I thought, well, like this could easily be a billion different things. But because I still knew the midwife that was attending with my oldest and who had been there, we were in the same town at that time. I said, hey, this is what's going on. I reached out to her. She happened to be home. She answered her phone. So this is what's going on. What should I do? And she said, you know what? I have a tincture for you, because she's also a master herbalist. And she said, I have a tincture for you. Why don't you send David, my husband? He'll come get it, and then you can take it and like rest for the rest of the day and like tell me how you feel tomorrow. Call me in the morning. And I woke up in the morning and my heart just knew. Like I just knew in my heart. Didn't even get a chance to go to the bathroom or do anything like that. I was like, okay, I think that I just need to grieve. And I spent basically the whole day crying, not bleeding, crying. And I obviously I think that what had happened was that there just was not a viable pregnancy at all for many different reasons. But I ended up losing that baby and delivering that baby. And it kind of just like rattled our whole world, me especially, because at that point I was like, that doesn't happen, it's kind of this illusion of miscarriage that like, that doesn't happen to you, that happens to other people, especially like being into your second trimester. And I was somewhere between 12 and 14 weeks. And like, I was like, I feel safe here. Like I've done this a million times. Like my body knows what to do. And then to lose that child was really hard. And it was just so overwhelming. But I was grateful in the end, because I feel like it sprang a lot of growth for our family. We did a lot of different shifting into whole lifestyle changes and living a more holistic life and living a little bit more in tune with each other and with each other's needs. So we are they're still utilizing some of the practices that we adopt in that postpartum period after that miscarriage. And I actually started actively pursuing my yoga certification at that point, because yoga was one of the few things that walked me through in that postpartum period, through postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. It's one of the grounding things, and learning to meditate and being able to like understand like all of the drishtis and all of everything that went out throughout, that it wasn't just physical self, it was more than that. And my husband and I both kind of chatted, do we want to have more kids? Is this something that we want to risk again? Do we really need to do this again? And, he was 2 weeks-ish away from deploying, and we are having this conversation. And I said, I don't think it's a decision anymore. And he said, I'm sorry. I said, I don't think this is a decision anymore. I was at this point, about 3 months postpartum from the miscarriage. And he looked at me, he said, why? I said, I think I'm pregnant. And he was like, like at this point, the man had been home like for like a weekend, like every 3 weeks. And he's like, how do you know? Like, there's no way, it's too early. And I said, oh, no, pretty sure I'm pregnant. And I said, and I'm pretty sure it's a girl. This time.
Wow. And you really know your body. Your intuition is high.
I don't know. I haven't been able to do that since. I'll tell you that. And he was like, well, okay, we'll see what happens. And I said, I think I'm going to go ahead and test. And he was like, I don't think you should. I think that that's scary. And what if it's a chemical pregnancy? What if it's, like all these things? Think about the heartbreak. And I said, I think I'm just going to go ahead and test. And of course I tested, and it was like 2 very bold lines. And I just kept testing and testing and testing and testing. And I think that moms who have had a miscarriage before are aware like that those 2 lines are so reassuring sometimes. Like they're so reassuring. And like you're looking at yesterday's and you're like, well, maybe I should just test again. Maybe I just need to test again. So I think I have a picture of just like a million different, not a million, but I'm pretty sure that it was roughly like 28 different tests, and all different kinds and things that I just picked up here and there. And so it was reassuring to finally be pregnant, even though we weren't quite sure if we were going to try again. And even though we didn't really try again, we were just actively practicing, like awareness within each other. So that was really fun. That was really beautiful to find out that way, and to just kind of like really feel like really resonate with the idea of knowing my body well enough. And that was really, really healing. And of course, 2 weeks later, my husband deployed.
So another home birth. So was he not present for that one either?
No, he made it home for that one.
Oh, great.
He did. He made it home within 24 hours of making.
Wow.
So by this time he had been at the command that he was with for about, I think, 4 years, or for a significant amount of time. He had some really good friends, and he told them the situation, and they said, okay, we're gonna make something work. You're gonna get home. Like, you're gonna get home. You can't miss another baby. Like, that's not possible. So he did make it home. And the pregnancy was really beautiful. I um, was able to practice yoga every day, and my kids had a lot of yoga, and I have these really phenomenal pictures of me, like upside down with this like massive belly, and like doing like different yoga and all these things. And it was really wonderful to practice and to do those things during the pregnancy. And the pregnancy was really, really healing. And I met the midwife that I'm now a student underneath, and I started my student and apprenticeship with her during that pregnancy. So that was really cool. So I worked as a birth attendant and a student, as an assistant to the midwife that I work with now throughout that pregnancy. And it's something very different about attending people while you're pregnant yourself, because I had been doing doula work a couple years before that. But attending women and attending family and birthing people, like, while you're also creating life, it's just so different. And it was really beautiful to meet these people, and some of the people that I attended and their families, like, we're still good friends, and that's really fun. And like, it's kind of, like babies that are all roughly around the same age, and it was just
That's
like
so neat. Your own little community.
Yeah, it was like our own kind of made community. It was really fun. And I reached the end of my pregnancy and I stopped working, and I had my midwife, she was at my blessing way, and she said, hey, do you want to have your prenatal today? Like, you were supposed to have one tomorrow, so we could just, I'm already here. Do you want to do it here? I said, yeah, sure, that's totally fine. And then I remembered that I was doing, I was huge and massively pregnant, so pants were no longer an option. And I was like, underwear no longer an option. And then I was like, well, maybe not. Like, I'm not wearing underwear. And like, we laughed about it. And she said, it's totally okay. I'll come over tomorrow. I said, okay, cool. And she lived right down the road. And she came over, and that was the day that my husband had just gotten home. And I picked up my husband and my mother from the airport at the same time.
Wow.
And,
so was your sister present as well?
No.
So this was the first birth that she wasn't present for.
Yeah.
But happy that your husband was. That's very lucky.
Yeah. It was definitely lucky. She had actually just had her own baby at that point, so traveling was a little bit more tricky at that way. Mm-hmm. So I picked up my mom from the airport, and I came back, and we had a prenatal appointment, and my midwife walked in, and I should have known, but I was irritable and I was contracting slightly, but it was kind of a joke because like my husband had just come home, and of course, like, we had sex, and the like reality was that like that's more likely to cause contractions than to me be actually in labor. And so she was like, well, what are your contractions like? And I said, they're really sporadic and I don't think they're real, but just so you know, because she was aware that my second was born really quickly. And so just so you know, I just want to let you know, like, hey, I've been kind of contracting, and they're really like all over the place, and they're not staying long, but they're there. She was like, okay, cool. And yeah, your baby's lined up. Before she had been sitting like at an angle and not really settling into like, my pelvis or anything like that. She said, well, your baby is nice and settled. So if this is it, like, she's in a great position. Cool. Awesome. And she said, well, call me if you need me. I have a lunch, and it's like right down the road. It's only 10 minutes away from your house, and it's a business lunch. So they'll understand if I have to run. I said, cool. I think I might go grocery shopping. I don't have like groceries, and I'm out of like, water to go in the water jug. And she's like, okay, call me. No big deal. And I looked down at the ground, and my kids had been eating cereal in front of the TV, like on the coffee table. And there was cereal like on the floor. And I was like, ugh, like, that makes me so mad. Like, cereal on the floor, And my husband kind of looked at me, and he was like, okay, like, I'll pick it up. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to shower and then we'll go grocery shopping because I like adore grocery shopping. It makes me happy. And I was like, we're going to go shopping. It's going to make me happy. So I go to get into the shower and I was in the shower for probably about like 30 minutes. It was a very long shower. And by the time I got out of the shower, I was like, had like my hair wrapped and like a half of a robe on. And I walked out and I looked at my husband and I was like, can you fill up the birth pool, please? Because I'm pretty sure I'm in labor.
Call the midwife. Tell her to box up for lunch.
This is real. And it was roughly about 30 minutes after she left that I sat down on the couch and my husband's like fiddling with the birth pool and like pulling out like the birth stuff and like, trying to do all these things. And he's kind of moving at like his own pace because he's anticipating like 3 hours. And he's like, okay, so if I'm thinking off the time that, like she got in the shower to now, like it's only been 45 minutes or 30 minutes, it's fine. I got time. I put on my birth playlist and I put my headphones in and I'm just like singing along with my songs and contracting and just like moving through everything. And then it's about 10 minutes after and I realize, oh my God, I'm in transition. Like I can't talk, I can't think, I can't do anything. And I'm like, oh my God, I haven't called my midwife. So I call her. I don't think I even made sounds again, because apparently this is the thing that I do while I'm in labor. And I call my midwife and I just made labor transition noises into the phone, basically. And she just laughed and was like, I'm on my way. It's okay. I'm on my way. And I hung up the phone and I unplugged my headphone because I still wanted to hear my playlist, but they were getting tangled in my ears and it was making me angry. And I called my mom she was feeding my kids in the kitchen. And I called my mom over and she was like, hey. And I said, I think the baby's coming. And she was like, okay, did you call Renee? And I said, yes, I did. And she was like, okay, cool. And I said, can you please get me a Chuck's pad? Because I was just sitting on the couch, probably like at this point, like leaking fluid everywhere. She said, yeah, okay. So she runs and she grabs a couple Chuck's pads and we put them underneath me. And I'm like, and I'm pushing and my water's broken. And I just like lift up my whole body and pull this baby up. And I'm like, okay, I feel better.
Wow. All that pressure is just released. Wow, so fast.
Yeah. And some point at that time, I'm not really quite sure when my husband stepped in because he stopped fiddling with the birth pool. I think when I called my mom and he walked over and like, my mom's standing on this side, I'm facing them and my mom's standing on my right side by my right knee and my husband's standing by my left knee. And I'm just looking at them and I'm like, this is awesome. This is great. Like it was just this whole different birth experience than like the one that I had before where it was like really chaotic.
So you had that euphoric feeling again.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. Even throughout, like even though I was moving and like the majority of my thoughts were, moving through transition and doing all those things, I didn't have the chaos of like, oh my God, this is moving too quickly. Oh my God, what am I doing? Or, how is this going to happen? And oh my gosh, should I call the midwife? It was a very natural progression of things that I knew I was capable of doing this. There was no doubt in my mind that I was fine. My midwife was on her way, like it's okay. I didn't ever think like, oh man, I'm going to do this all by myself and it's going to be great. I was just thinking like, hey, I can do this. And there was never a doubt in my mind that I could do it. And that thought and process of itself was so healing. From, like a hospital birth slightly, but also like in a miscarriage also, and feeling so duped by my body there for a second, so let down from my body. And then to, move through that and have a baby. And just the whole time I was just thinking, oh my gosh, like, this is awesome. I'm doing it. Like, oh my gosh. And then, I had my baby and my midwife had not made it yet. And I, pulled my baby up to my chest. My husband and I are just like looking at this beautiful, we're like laughing. Oh my gosh, it really is a girl. Like we're having a baby. Like we had this.
Oh, so you were right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And of course, both of my sons are running around the house. Like, this is just like, whoa, it's a cool thing right now. And they're standing and they were behind my mom and my husband. And they were like, is mom having a baby? said, yeah, babe, I'm having a baby. And like my mom kind of looked at me like, do you want me to move them? And I was like, they're fine. Let them play, whatever. And they totally watched their sister be born and were like, oh, that's so cool. Mom has a baby. And they were doing like victory laps, like around the living room when the midwife walked in, like, we have a sister, you know?
Oh, that's so sweet.
For anyone who's ever doubting, you know, like obviously your own child, you'll know them. But if you have a doubt about including your child in a birth, I say do it. I'm always a big proponent for just include your kid because they're a part of the family and it's so special for them to be able to like be aware of like how birth works and how a baby is like, you know, actually created and brought forth into this world like through the womb. So
Mhm.
that was really fun and really wonderful.
So
My
how far apart was your third from your fourth?
From my third to my fourth, there was 2 years. 2
Okay.
years. Yeah. Hmm. And my fourth caught us by incredible surprise. Um, was just a completely what the heck kind of moment. And we were actively moving and being retransitioned into or PCSing to a new place in Colorado and moving away from Virginia. So leaving the community that I had created, leaving, you know, like my student and apprenticeship behind, the like homeschooling, the home birthing community, the holistic community that we had created and joined, you know, leaving that behind. And I actually didn't move. We had the opportunity to move when our fourth baby was a couple weeks postpartum, a couple weeks old, or before at about 36 weeks. And I chose to just go ahead and move early because I didn't want to be moving with a newborn. And I was heeding my own advice that I now give parents and families. You know, I really wanted to rest in that period. I really wanted to rest. So my pregnancy was it was almost like I didn't even realize I was pregnant because I was so busy.
Yeah, I had 3 kids now, so
Yeah, exactly.
they keep you busy.
It was a big transition. It was a very large transition into being pregnant, into being pregnant soon. My first two children are 3 years apart. The second and the third are 2 and a little bit apart. And the third and the fourth are actually they're 2 years almost exactly. So it's 2 years and 2 months. And that was a different transition because there's a big difference between a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, at least in our home it is. So that was a whole different thing. So I moved to Colorado while I was about 36 weeks pregnant, and I didn't have a midwife, and I was kind of feeling bitter about the fact that I was moving. So that's kind of where I was at. And I decided that I was just going to go ahead and do a free birth. And my husband, I'd done all my prenatal care, and we moved into Colorado. And about a week before my child was born, before the fourth child was born, he said, "Are we really having a free birth?" And I was like, well, I don't want anybody in my birth space that I don't know. I knew what I was expecting and I knew what I needed, and I was not willing to budge on those things. And I said, I'll walk you through all the things. Like, I know all the things. And he was like, yeah, I know, but like, I can't get that information from you if you can't give it to me, you know? So we went back and forth about it, and he convinced me. He said, I just really would like a midwife present. Just even if you're just asking her to just sit in the living room, let's have a midwife present. So I ended up hiring a midwife, and I was completely honest with her. I was like, I'm gonna be completely straight with you. I was planning a free birth. Like I've done this a couple times before. I have a lot of knowledge. This is all the prenatal care. I had like basically a folder of all of my prenatal care that I had been caring for. And I said, here you go. This is what I've been caring for. And she was just so understanding. She was like, you know what? I totally get it. I absolutely get it. She said, if you want me just to come and sit on my hands, I can do that. It's okay. And she was really understanding of that. So that was wonderful. This pregnancy, I happened to be pregnant at the same time as my sister, and she did make it out to the birth.
Oh, that's very special.
Yeah. So her and my mom were staying with us while I was pregnant with my last one. We were waiting for him to arrive. And previously I had all my babies either on or before my due date. And so we kind of anticipated that with this fourth one. And it didn't really happen. Saw my due date and it came and went, and then it went again, and then another day, and then another day. And I was about a week post dates, and my mom and my sister were leaving the next morning, and they were like, "Hey, what would you do? Like, what are some tricks that you have up your sleeve that you would help somebody else to go into labor who needs to have a baby?" And I'm like, "I don't really believe in that. I think babies come when they're ready, and I don't know." And we did some research, and we ended up finding a smoothie. And I said, "Okay, I'll do the smoothie." I got a chiropractor adjustment. I drank the smoothie, and I ended up doing some homeopathic work as well. And I really think it was the homeopathic that actually put me into labor, because my fourth child, I think that I had been having contractions on and off, but they kept petering out. And I think that his body just was not in an ideal situation to continue labor. I would have eventually started labor because my body knows how to do that. But I think that the homeopathic that I took allowed me to shift and him to shift so that we could actually begin labor.
Mhm.
And so I spent some time on my hands and knees and just really moving my body and just kind of listening. And I read a book to my kids, and I have a picture of me. I knew I was in labor at that point. And I have a picture of myself with a belly that looks like it's about to fall out, and my 2-year-old's propped on top of my belly. And I'm sitting on a ball, like a birth ball. And I'm reading I think we were reading Harry Potter at that time. We were reading Chamber of Secrets, and I read my kids to sleep, and I got into the bed and I let my husband fall asleep. And I just kind of laid there, and I was like, okay, like, I think I'm in labor. All right, this looks good. This is totally wonderful. And it was a much different experience than the one that I had with my daughter, the previous birth, because hers came and I was like, I'm in labor. Okay, I'm in labor. Wow. And my fourth child was a little bit more of like a very slow progression, quicker than average. I think that from start to finish, she was about 3.5 hours. But yeah, I called my sister, and I called my mom, and I called the midwife. And it was that in and of itself was really hard because where we lived, we didn't have any signal or any internet access, or we were completely rural. So I think what ended up happening was my husband like trekked down the dirt road a little bit and then like made the call and called the midwife, and everybody came back. And my sister brought her oldest daughter, and of course she was pregnant at the time too. And it was kind of just this like really warm, slow kind of environment that created this like slowness. And the midwife walked in, and she had her bag and like an oxygen tank and things like that. And she walked them and put them down in the room. And I was like, I can't see those, and you have to move them. And she was like, oh, okay. And like slowly move them like around the bed so they wouldn't be like in my line of vision. And she was really great. And I just kind of labored back and forth. And it was odd because in the moment I was like, my water is already broken. Like, why is my baby not here? Because I had just been so accustomed to these babies just like flying out of me. And my fourth child definitely made me work for it. He was like, I'll come when I'm ready. Like, it's fine. We'll be fine, Mom. Like, it's okay. But he was born, and my husband caught him, and the midwife was really respectful. She basically sat on her hands until I asked her after my baby was born, was tired. And I was like, okay. And she was like, hey, how do you feel about, baby squatting and getting your placenta out? And I was like, do whatever you have to do. Like, please come help me because I'm so tired and I don't want to manage any of it,
Yeah, that was your longest labor. So you were like, "Oh, okay, let's."
Well, it was
move
my second longest because my firstborn was about 12 hours. But
Oh, okay.
but yeah, it was long in comparison to the previous two that I experienced. So and that immediate postpartum was just the best one that I've had yet. I knew what I needed, I knew what I wanted, and I knew how to ask for it too, because it's, in my opinion, a really big component of that. So yeah, it was really beautiful. I didn't end up cutting the cord, or I hadn't decided if I was going to do a lotus birth or not, and I decided not to. But I immediately picked my son and I up, and we went to the bath, and we drew like a nice warm bath. And I have this picture of us, and like it's a placenta in a bowl floating, and like my baby next to it. And all you can see is just like his little face out of the
No.
water, and I'm just balancing him. And it's just this really cool picture. And we, like got our first latch in there, and it just got to really soak and kind of clean up and just relax in the moment. And then we moved to the bed and had a really sweet, I got to like do some of the newborn exam because at that point, like I kind of knew. um, and that was fun. And I just got to like look over, my baby in a really slow measure. And the only thing that was slightly disappointing about it was that my daughter slept through the whole thing. I really wanted her awake. I really wanted her to experience it, especially, like my female child. I really wanted her to witness her brother being born, even though she was so young. um, so that was it. But it was pretty precious because we crawled in bed and we co-sleep. So we crawled in bed and I had my baby tucked right here underneath and her baby brother. And then she was asleep up against my back. And she woke up and she moved kind of. And I said, baby, be careful because the baby is right here. And she perked up and looked at me and looked over my back and was like, oh, is that my baby brother?
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty precious. And since then, they've basically been inseparable. So,
That's so sweet. Wow, your story is so powerful. Thank you for going through it all. And wow, that was a roller coaster.
yeah, they're pretty fun. They've all they have all stayed true to the energy that they gave throughout their labor and delivery. My first is real even killed. He's not doesn't get rattled very easily. My second is like a police chase. And my daughter she's very calculated, very clear, very level-headed. She came right through and knew exactly what she needed. And my fourth is the baby, and he's practically feral, like he just does like as he does, and that's about it. So
yeah, he took his time.
yeah. Oh my goodness gracious. He made me work. So yeah, it was home birth has changed me for the better. It's absolutely been a life-altering type of experience. And I'm so grateful that I live in an area where it's so honored. It's very cherished, in my opinion. And that might be because I'm slightly biased because, like I work in the community and I get to experience it, but it really is a beautiful community. And I'm grateful for what it's provided for our life. And now that I'm not having children anymore and not having home births, the ability to be able to help families through home births is like, it just kind of like wraps that cycle up,
Full circle.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you had such a positive outlook on it, even when you were 16.
Yeah. 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 Like I said, I think Spike kind of drew that a little bit.
Yeah. You showed them.
Yeah, I did. I'm still the crazy, I'll travel home and they're like, oh, there's Danny, that hippie. Well, her. Her and her gaggle of children going everywhere. Like, yep, that's me. It's stuck, but it's the best life. It's the best life that we've ever lived.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really enjoyed listening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And I'm sure it will inspire lots of mothers who are thinking about home births.
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's worth it. And I think it's really beautiful.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. I hope you have a great night.
You too.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye.
Well, thanks for listening. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Serene Support. I also teach prenatal yoga as well. So if you're in the Chesterfield, Virginia area, I teach yoga at the Cheston Landing Clubhouse, and I also sell houses locally. So comment below if you want to get connected. Thank you so much to Danny again for sharing your story. Alrighty, bye.